Alla Tulia Meldonia Ahara Mariese, and welcome, dear friends, to our first ever episode of Tolkien Untangled. Now, in this series, what I want to do is take the hundreds of thousands of words that Tolkien wrote detailing his legendarium, and I want to, well, untangle them. I want to make them accessible, and I want to try and tell some of Tolkien's tales. Now, I'm sure all of you watching this are going to be familiar with The Lord of the Rings, but what I want to illustrate is the extent to which The Lord of the Rings is just the absolute tip top of the iceberg that is Tolkien's legendarium. Like, the entire events of The Lord of the Rings only take place over the span of just 9 months, in the 3019th year of the Third Age. So there is so much to talk about before Frodo ever set off on his fateful quest to Mordor. And so, in this episode, I'm going to start at the very beginning. And when it comes to Tolkien, that doesn't mean the beginning of our main characters or the beginning of a city or anything like that. It means the beginning of the universe itself. Now, I'm sure when you guys think about Middle-earth, you think of elves and men and dwarves and orcs, right? And of course, they are the races that we're most familiar with, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about them in the future. In fact, in the next episode, or maybe the one after actually, we're going to dive right into the genesis of the elves. But at this very early point in our story, those races do not exist yet. And so, in this video, we're going to deal exclusively with gods and angels and demons. And the first character who begins the entire legendarium is the one, Eru Ilúvatar. Now, Eru Ilúvatar is, for all intents and purposes, God. As in capital G, God, the one, the all-powerful, the creator of all things. And Eru Ilúvatar dwells in the timeless halls, with the flame imperishable. Now, the flame imperishable, also known as the secret fire, is the aspect of Ilúvatar's power that deals with creation, okay? So it's with this that Eru Ilúvatar creates all the sentient life that we'll see throughout the entire legendarium. And this is important, alright, because only Eru Ilúvatar can create life. Now we know the Dark Lords can corrupt life into different forms, such as orcs and other things, but only Eru can create, and especially only Eru can create free will, which orcs don't have. But if this secret fire sounds familiar, it's because you've definitely heard Gandalf mention it on the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. You remember he says to the Balrog,
I am a servant of the secret fire. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun!
And what Gandalf is basically saying here is that I am a servant of Eru Ilúvatar, the one true god. And you, a Balrog, have no power next to him. Anyway, the first thing that Eru Ilúvatar does in the story is create the Ainur. And the Ainur are the Holy Ones. They are the divine spirits, created as an offspring of Ilúvatar's thought. Now, we don't know exactly how many Ainur there are, but we know there's a lot. And we know that because Eru Ilúvatar is an omnibenevolent god, the Ainur are also all good. Except for one. In fact, the mightiest of all the Ainur, and the most powerful being in existence after Eru Ilúvatar, from the very beginning came to resent his creator, and he went rogue. And his name is Melkor. And there's a good chance that some of you will have heard of Melkor. Because, despite being a less than delightful person, Melkor is the one character who will keep on showing up again and again and again in the story of the Silmarillion. For he is destined to become the first Dark Lord. Now, as I say, Melkor is dissatisfied with the fact that he cannot create life as Eru can. And so even before the universe is made, Melkor journeys off on his own into the void in search of the secret fire. But he never finds it, alright? Because what Melkor does not know is that the secret fire dwells solely inside Eru Ilúvatar. Anyway, we're not going to have much of a story, are we, if we don't eventually get to the creation of the universe. So, without any further ado, let's talk about Tolkien's equivalent of the Big Bang. Now, very much unlike our own universe, the universe of Tolkien does not begin with chaos, but instead with music. For Eru Ilúvatar teaches the Ainur his music, and he gathers all the Ainur and instructs them to sing together in harmony. And he told them to weave into the music their own thoughts and ideas, because as the Ainur are created with the secret fire, they all have free will. But, as I guess is always the case with free will, isn't it? It comes at a cost. Because into the theme Melkor weaves discord and darkness, which clashes with the theme of Eru. Now, as I say, Melkor did this because he was dissatisfied with only being the second mightiest being in existence. And so he used the music to try and increase his own power and glory. Now, Tolkien writes that when Melkor did this, the other Ainur were dismayed, and many of them faltered, but a few were so overcome by Melkor's theme that they actually attuned their own music to his, which basically means, right here still, before the universe is even made, some of the Ainur defect away from Eru Ilúvatar and they join Melkor. Now, we'll talk about these dark Ainur in just a minute, but to the surprise of, well, everyone really, Eru Ilúvatar doesn't get mad. He simply stands and smiles and raises his left hand to begin a second theme of music. Now, Tolkien tells us that this second theme is both like and unlike the first, but it too is soon corrupted and defiled by Melkor. And the other Ainur are completely disheartened, they don't know what to think. But at this point, Eru Ilúvatar becomes stern, and he begins a third theme. And when this theme is also tarnished by Melkor, Eru ends the whole music with one note that is deeper than the abyss, higher than the firmament, and as piercing as the light of Ilúvatar. That's Tolkien's exact words there. Now, this music of the Ainur, this that I've just talked about, is called the Ainulindalë. And if you open up the Silmarillion, this is the first chapter, or rather the first book. And I feel like quite a lot of people read this, and it's just too conceptual, it's just a bit too weird, and it's certainly not what you'd expect if you've just come from The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or something like that. But it would be such a shame if we stopped the story here, because after this, things begin to get insanely cool. You see, when the music is finished, Eru says, "Behold your music." And each of the Ainur gets a vision of a world unfolding within the music. And even the discord of Melkor contributes in some way to the beauty and glory of this creation. So after that vision, Eru says the word Ea, which is the name of the universe. And as he says it, Ea bursts into being. Now, straight away, Eru sends the secret fire into the universe, into Ea. And it's for this reason that Melkor immediately becomes obsessed with Ea's dominion. But as the Ainur look into Ea, they see that it's empty. For although they've been shown a vision of the world, it's now up to them to make it. So it's at this point that most, although not all, but most, of the Ainur descend and they leave the timeless halls forever. And they enter into the universe of Ea. And to do this, they have to take raiment, they have to take bodies. Now, the Ainur are effectively shapeshifters, they can take any body they choose, but in order to interact with the world, they do need some kind of physical form. Now, it's here that we meet a few more very important characters. You see, in the mind of Ilúvatar, Melkor has a brother called Manwë. And it's Manwë, along with two other Ainur called Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, and Aule, the Lord of Stone, who first descend and begin building the planet of Arda. Now, Arda is a word I'm going to use quite a lot, because at this point, it's not really enough just to talk about Middle-earth. Now, I know obviously Middle-earth is the place where most of this story is going to happen, but Middle-earth is just one continent upon the planet that is Arda. And it's Manwë, Ulmo, and Aule who forge this planet into existence. But it's very important to note that even from the very beginning, Melkor is there, sowing his discord and darkness into the very fabric of Arda. For Melkor covets this planet, and he tells his brother, that he names the whole world unto himself. And thus begins the first war of our story. And it is a war for the very creation of Arda itself. Now, there are no armies or anything like that, and Melkor fights his brother and the other Ainur with the fabric of Arda itself. So, where Aule forges mountains, Melkor throws them down. And where Ulmo creates oceans, Melkor spills them over the land. And so this is the reason why Arda is not a perfect and symmetrical world. It was created in violence. And the realm that will one day be Middle-earth was originally Arda's first battleground. Anyway, the first war does eventually come to an end when the final one of the Ainur descends from the timeless halls and enters Ea. And his name is Tulkas the Champion. And Tulkas is the physically strongest of all the Ainur. Like, he's not the most powerful, we know Melkor is the most powerful, but Tulkas is the strongest. I guess he has, like, the biggest muscles. And when Melkor hears his mighty laughter, he flees beyond the walls of night. And for a long time, Melkor is gone. So, with an imperfect, but, nevertheless pretty awesome world, the Ainur settle, and in Arda they build a kingdom of paradise for themselves to dwell in. And this era of beauty and peace is known as the Spring of Arda. Now, before I go on with the story, at this point in the Silmarillion, Tolkien does something a little bit weird. He takes a break from the narrative and gives us this whole little section, this whole little book, called the Valar Quenta. And this isn't really a story, it's just sort of an introduction to some of the most important Ainur. And so, I think I'm going to take a leaf out of Tolkien's book and do the same thing now. Because although I've used the word Ainur quite a lot already, throughout the rest of the story, the Ainur are split into two different groups. The Valar and the Maiar. Now, the Valar are the most powerful, right? And there are only 14 of them. Technically there's 15, including Melkor, but he's immediately cast out, and so he's no longer counted among them. So really, there's 14. And the Valar are sort of the gods of Arda. Now, I know I said Eru Ilúvatar is the capital G god, but he lives in the Timeless Halls, he never enters Ea. And so Arda is ruled by a pantheon of little g gods and goddesses. And these are the 14 Valar. So, starting I guess with the king of the Valar, we have Manwë, the brother of Melkor. And Manwë is the lords of the wind and the sky. And Manwë's wife is the Lady Varda, the queen of the Valar and the Lady of Light. Now, Varda is a really important character, because when we finally do get to the Elves, we'll see how she's sort of their number one deity. To the Elves, Varda will be known as Elbereth Gilthoniel. But I should say, the Elves aren't the only ones who are in love with Varda. You see, from the very beginning, before Ea, Melkor looked upon Varda and he loved her. But when Varda witnessed the discord in his part of the theme, she came to despise Melkor. And because Varda is the embodiment of all this Ainur light, Melkor actually fears her more than anyone else. Now, next up we have Ulmo, and as I said, he is the Lord of Waters, and so he's in charge of all the rivers and the seas and the lakes in Arda. And Ulmo is a little unusual among the Valar for two reasons. One, unlike the others, he tends not to dwell on the land, and instead he spends most of his time alone within Arda's great oceans. But the other reason he's unusual is that he is one of only two Valar who isn't married. Now, I mentioned Ulmo when I talked about the creation of Arda, and the other Valar who played an important role is Aule, the Lord of Stone and the craftsman, the smith, the creator of the Valar. And Aule's wife is the Lady Yavanna, the giver of fruits, and I guess the goddess of all growing things. So she's all about animals and nature and trees and things like that. But Yavanna also has a sister called Varna, and she is the lady of, I guess, lesser parts of nature. You know, Varna's all about flowers and blossom and singing birds, and I guess it's her duty to decorate her older sister's natural world. Now, Varna is also married, and her husband is called Orome, and he is the Lord of the Hunt. And he rides atop a great white steed called Nahar, and he carries a mighty hunting horn called the Valaroma. And just one little fun fact about Nahar, he is actually the direct ancestor of some of the great horses that we will meet later in The Lord of the Rings, especially the Maiar, especially Shadowfax, who is, I guess, a very distant descendant of Nahar, the first great horse. Anyway, just like Varna, Orome has a sister, and her name is Nessa. And Nessa is the ever-young. She is the swiftest of the Valar, and it's written by Tolkien that she's quick enough to outrun a deer. Although, it's also written by Tolkien that Nessa is the least powerful of the 14. And just like almost everyone else, Nessa has a spouse called Tulkas the Champion. Although at this point, actually, they're not technically married yet. But you'll all remember Tulkas as the champion, the wrestler, the one who frightened off Melkor in the first war with just the sound of his laughter. So that's 9 of the Valar, but there are 5 left. And they are the Feanturi, the Masters of Spirits. So 3 of them are related, 2 brothers and a sister. And the oldest of the brothers is known as Mandos. Now, Mandos is the doomsman of the Valar. He is in charge of judgment and fate, but he also has another very important duty. You see, Mandos is the keeper of the dead. He resides over the halls of Mandos, which is where the souls of dead elves will eventually end up. So, in some ways, I guess you could sort of compare Mandos to someone like Hades or Pluto. But I have to clarify, Mandos is in no way evil. I mean, he's very stern, I wouldn't describe him as a fun guy, but he is entirely fair. You know, just because he's in charge of the dead, that doesn't make him a bad guy. Anyway, the wife of Mandos is called Vaire, and she is the weaver of the Valar, just like the Fates, I guess, in a few different real-world European mythologies. And Vaire is in charge of weaving the tapestry of the world and recording all the deeds of Arda. Now, the younger brother of Mandos is one of my favorites. His name is Irimo, and he is the lord of sleep and dreams and visions. And I guess this makes him the most psychedelic of all the Valar. But Irimo's wife is called Este, and she's great too. She's the lady of rest and healing. And so, I feel if there's any Valar that you'd want to hang around with, Irimo and Este are by far the most chilled out. But anyway, the sister of Mandos and Irimo, her name is Nienna, and she's possibly the most unusual of all the Valar. See, for one thing, she's the other one who isn't married, but more interestingly, she is the lady of grief and sorrow. And you might think, oh, that makes her pretty depressing, right? But I have to say, she is also one of my favorites, because Nienna represents such a profoundly beautiful sentiment that Tolkien put right at the heart of his legendarium. For Nienna is not just the lady of grief and sorrow, but also of mercy and hope. For Tolkien believed that in mourning and suffering there is courage and beauty. And Nienna doesn't weep for herself, but for all the woes in Middle-earth. And so all those who know her come to learn compassion and wisdom. And it seems that to Tolkien, compassion is the mightiest of all virtues. In fact, of Nienna's many pupils, the most famous is the Ainur who will one day become known as Gandalf. And he's about as compassionate as they come.
Do not say, do not weep, for not all tears are uneven.
But anyway, that is all 14. That is the 14 Valar. But I did also mention the Maiar. Now, if the Valar are a pantheon of gods, then the Maiar are kind of more like demigods, or angels, or in some cases, demons. And unlike the 14 Valar, Tolkien never tells us how many Maiar there are. But it seems like there are loads, and many of them are never given names by Tolkien, but some of them, the most important ones, are. And the first one Tolkien tells us about is the most skilled in arms of all the Maiar, so I guess he's the best fighter. And he is a dude called Eonwe. And Eonwe is the herald of Manwe, which I guess gives him the highest authority of all the Maiar. And Eonwe's wife is called Ilmaire, and just as her husband is the herald of Manwe, she is the handmaiden of Varda. But there are quite a few other Maiar that Tolkien tells us about. He tells us about Arien, who's a spirit of fire, who's destined to one day guide the sun. And her counterpart is Telion, a hunter of Orome, who, again, one day is destined to guide the moon. But I suppose the most famous of all the Maiar is a guy that you've probably never heard of, called Olorin. But in many thousands of years, Olorin will be given a task by the Valar, and he will be bound into the humble and weakened body of an old man dressed in grey. And to the elves of Middle-earth, this old man will be known as the Grey Pilgrim, Mithrandir, but to the men, he will simply be Gandalf. But it does need to be said that of all the Maiar, not all of them are good. You remember I said at the beginning that some Maiar were corrupted by Melkor and they attuned their music to his. Well, one of Ulmo's Maiar is a dude called Osse. And just as Ulmo is the lord of waters, Osse is the lord of coastal waters, and specifically coastal storms. Now this is pretty interesting because Osse was actually drawn to Melkor, and at first he joined him. But Osse was eventually redeemed and brought back to the side of good by his wife Cuivienen. And whereas Osse creates these violent storms, Cuivienen calms them. And so, to all sailors and maritime people of Middle-earth, Osse and Cuivienen are two of the most important Maiar. However, it is said by Tolkien that the mightiest of all the Maiar is a spirit of creation called Mairon. Now, Mairon was a pupil of Aule back in the day, the craftsman. And Mairon is arguably the greatest craftsman ever to live in Middle-earth. And Mairon, that name, what it means is the beloved. But, like so many other formerly beloved things, Mairon is corrupted by Melkor. And eventually he becomes the Dark Lord's chief disciple. And of all the Dark Maiar, Mairon becomes the darkest. Now, I know I just said that Mairon means the beloved, but once he falls in league with Melkor, his name is changed to mean the abhorred. And in the elven tongue, the abhorred translates into Sauron. And so, this is the origin of Sauron, the creator of the One Ring and the great enemy of the Second and Third Ages. But, right here, at the very beginning of time, Sauron is simply a servant to an even greater Dark Lord. And Sauron is not the only Maiar that Melkor has working for him. No, he has a few others. And among the most powerful are these demons of shadow and flame, known by some as the Valarauka. but known by most as the Balrogs. Now, we all know the Balrog of Moria, don't we? But in the beginning, Melkor has many Balrogs serving him. But the Lord of the Balrogs, the most powerful one, is called Gothmog, and he is the commander of Melkor's evil army. Now, just think for a second, alright, just think how terrifying and badass the Balrog of Moria is. But now consider he was only one of many, and Gothmog was his king. Now, guys, I've got to be honest, I'm afraid this video has gone on a little bit longer than I thought it was going to, and I really feel like I can't justify the first ever video being like 35-40 minutes long. And I guess, honestly, the truth is I probably just underestimated how much cool stuff Tolkien gave us to talk about. So, I think I'm going to end this video here. But next week, we'll return to the story and explore the Years of the Lamps, which is this primeval era where the gods of Middle-earth ruled. And we'll also see how, with a little help from Melkor, even the paradise of the Valar cannot last forever. But thank you all very much for watching, dear friends, and because you beautiful people have made it all the way to the end of the episode, I thought I'd finish these videos up with a little fun fact about either Tolkien or his legendarium, because if there's one thing you're going to learn about me, it's that I absolutely love fun facts. So our first fun fact is a little fact concerning hobbits. So there was once a lady hobbit called Laelia Clayhanger, and she was married to a guy called Fortinbras Took, who happened to be the Thane of the Shire, which is effectively the closest thing the hobbits have to royalty, except that Thanes don't really do anything. They just kind of sit there and look good. Now, Laelia Clayhanger, or Laelia Took, as she became when she was married, was not a very popular hobbit, and she was considered immensely annoying by her family. In fact, for most of her life, she was known as Laelia the Fat. And the reason she was so unpopular is that when her husband Fortinbras died, Laelia became the matriarch of the Took family, and she effectively ruled as Thane for 22 years. You see, even though Laelia had a son, called Ferumbras, he was not allowed to take power until he married, and it's said that he never found a wife because there was no woman in all the Shire who was willing to live in the same home as Laelia. So, as I reckon you guys can imagine, Ferumbras would have a lot to gain if his mother suddenly, died. Now, this is the part with the actual fun fact, because Laelia did eventually die in her later years when she was so fat she couldn't even move. And so she needed an attendant to wheel her around. And this attendant was a young lady called Pearl Took. Now, one day, Pearl accidentally, and I'm saying that with air quotes, tripped and dropped Laelia down a flight of stairs to her death. Now after this, Ferumbras finally did succeed his mother, and he became Thane. But the Took family never spoke of the accident again. But this is where things get interesting, because Pearl Took was later seen walking around the Shire wearing a priceless Took necklace, which heavily implies Thane Ferumbras may have rewarded her for offing his mother. Now the reason this fact is especially fun is that Pearl has a younger brother, and he is Pippin. As in, yeah, that Pippin from Lord of the Rings. So whenever you see Pippin in the movies, think about the fact that his older sister is a type of hobbit assassin, who it seems straight up murdered Laelia the Fat on the orders of her son, the new Thane. It's like a Hobbit Game of Thrones or something. Pippin's sister is a little hobbit Terminator. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, as always, dear friends, until next time, much love, stay groovy, and Navaya Melanin.